Okay, let's start with the epithelial tissues. The first thing you need to know when you are trying to name the epithelial tissues is that epithelial tissues have a first, middle, and last name. There is one exception, that is transitional epithelium, and we'll talk about that one when we get there. So right here you will see that the first name is going to be how many layers this epithelial tissue has. If it has one layer, then the first name is simple. If it has multiple layers, then the first name is stratified. The middle name is going to be what shape the top layer of cells have. So if the top layer of cells are squashed looking, they're going to be squamous. If the top layer of cells looks cuboidal or like cubes, it's going to be cuboidal as the middle name. And if the top row of cells look like tall rectangles, then the middle name is going to be columnar. The last name is always going to be the family name or the big tissue category, which is epithelium. Okay, so remember, first name, how many layers, middle name, what is the shape of the cells, and last name is the big tissue category or the family, which is epithelium or epithelial. Okay, this is our first epithelial tissue we're looking at. And this is simple squamous epithelium. And you're looking from the top view. So it's hard to see that there's only one layer here. So on the practical, what you're looking for are little fried egg-shaped cells. You'll see these look like fried eggs. And these two pictures here on the left are more indicative of what you will see in our laboratory. Again, if it has a fried egg appearance, so this little nucleus right here looks like the yolk of the egg, and then the cytoplasm looks like the white of the egg. So if you see the fried egg, then you know that the specific tissue name is simple, because it's one layer, squamous, these are squashed cells, they're not cuboidal or they're not columnar, and the family name or the big tissue category, epithelium. So simple, squamous, epithelium. That is the specific tissue. The big tissue category is epithelium or epithelial. Going to our next tissue here, this is stratified squamous epithelium. What you're looking at is you can see just rows and rows and rows and rows all the way down here of epithelial cells. So that means the first name, multiple rows or multiple layers, is stratified. Second name is going to be the shape. If you look up at the top row of cells, they're not tall columns or they're not rectangular, so then it's not columnar. They're not cuboidal or cube shapes, so we know that's not it, but they look very squashed. So these squashed cells would be squamous. So our middle name would be squamous. And our last name would be our family name or big tissue category, which is epithelium. So these are stratified, squamous, epithelium. Going to our next tissue, the cuboidal tissues, these are usually tubules in the body. So think of it like this. If you're at home and you have a leaky water hose, you cut the water hose and you remove the leaky part and you continue to use the rest of the water hose. So if you take that water hose and you look down that water hose, you're seeing the tube, which is cut, which looks like this right here. So if you see circles like this, or you see ovals, there's an oval right there, there's another oval right there. The ovals look like if you step on the water hose, okay? So circles and ovals will indicate to you that you're probably looking at a cuboidal epithelium. Excuse me. So right here, we're looking at this circle right here. First name, how many rows of nuclei can you see within this circle? Right here, you can see there's only one row of nuclei. Over here, he kind of falls on top of another circle of cuboidal cells. Because you're only seeing one row of nuclei here, you know the first name is simple because there's only one layer of cells. The second name is cuboidal because, as we will see here, these cell shapes are square like cubes. So because they're squared like cubes, their middle name is cuboidal. Last name is epithelium, the big tissue category, their family name, epithelium. So the specific tissue would be simple cuboidal epithelium, and the big tissue category here would be epithelium or epithelial. Looking down in this picture here, this is more indicative of what you will see in our lab. It's kind of crowded, but you will look wherever the pointer under the scope points you towards. So for instance, if I pointed, let me get one you can see, this one right here, if I pointed to right here, you would look at it, and again, you see only one row of nuclei because you're only looking at the cells right there in that circle. Over here, the pointer's pointing to right here, so I'm looking at this circle, and one row of nuclei would tell me it's simple. The fact that it's a circle, or here you can see part of an oval, that clues you in that it's cuboidal. Okay. Now going down to our next tissue. This is going to be stratified cuboidal. You look at this circle right here and you see multiple rows of nuclei. That means there's multiple rows of cells. So if there's multiple rows of cells, the first name is stratified. These are cuboidal shaped cells. It's hard to tell here, but they are. And remember, you're looking for the ovals or the circles. Here you'll see another oval, and here another oval. So if you see these ovals or circles, you know it's cuboidal. Last name is epithelium for the big tissue category or the family of tissues you're talking about. So again, stratified cuboidal epithelium is the specific tissue. The big tissue category would be epithelium or epithelial. Going to our next tissue here, we have simple columnar epithelial. What you're looking at here is one row of nuclei, very neat looking tissue with a very distinct border up here. The reason it has a distinct border is because of all the microvilli that are on the top of this tissue. Remember, microvilli are those little finger-like extensions which increase absorption. Here's another one. You see one row of nuclei. Let me show you why you're seeing some things underneath it. Okay. The epithelial tissue is stopping right along this line. Right here. So all of this in here that I'm kind of shading in, this is your underlying connective tissue. So that is not the epithelial tissue. So when you're looking at it, you're only looking at right here. And there's basically all those nuclei pretty much in one row. So again, it's only one row, so it's simple. You can see these are tall columns. Oops. Well, hang on a sec, I'm trying to get my pen. Okay, so you can see these are tall column-shaped cells or tall rectangles. So because they're rectangular, their middle name is columnar. So again, your specific tissue here would be simple columnar epithelium, and your big tissue category would be epithelium or epithelial. Going down to the next tissue here, again, you're seeing these tall rectangular cells. So you can see this cell goes down like this and comes back up. So it's a tall rectangular cell. But you also see multiple layers of nuclei. So there's a layer here and there's a layer here. So because there's multiple layers, we know the first name is stratified. The second name is the shape of the cell, which we've already determined as columnar. And the last name is the family name or big tissue category name, which is epithelium. So the specific tissue is stratified columnar epithelium, and the big tissue category would be epithelium or epithelial. Moving on to the next tissue, This is our pseudostratified columnar epithelium. You'll notice the first thing when you look at this tissue is it's extremely messy and chaotic looking. And that clues you in that this is probably pseudostratified. With this, these cells are not layered. So this cell goes all the way down here and comes all the way back up, and this cell comes all the way down here and all the way back up, but they're each squishing each other. So it looks like a multi-layered tissue here. So it gives the false impression of stratified. So fake is pseudo. Pseudo means fake. So pseudo lashes means fake eyelashes. So pseudostratified means it gives the look of fake stratified. So it's not truly a stratified tissue. The middle name is called columnar cells, so it's going to be columnar, and the last name is the family name or big tissue category. So again, our specific tissue is pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and our big tissue category is epithelium or epithelial. Going to our next tissue. This is actually our last epithelial tissue. This is transitional epithelium. Transitional epithelium is going to be found in the bladder, and this tissue is always in the transition of changing shape. If your bladder is full of urine, these cells get squashed down so they're pretty flat, and then when you empty your bladder, those cells puff back up into really puffy cells. So what you'll notice here is there's a scalloped look on the top of those cells, and you see it even more in this one. That scalloped look on top, that fluffy scalloped look, that clues you in that this is going to be transitional. Transitional does not have the three names. Remember, like in the English language, there's always got to be a rule breaker out there. Well, transitional epithelium is the rule breaker. It only has a first name and a last name. So first name is transitional because it's always transitioning or changing shape. Last name is the family name or the big tissue category, which is epithelium. So again, the specific tissue here is transitional epithelium. The big tissue category is epithelium or epithelial. You can put either one of these on your practical. Okay, now let's go back up and start over, and we're going to point out the structures that you need to know for each of these tissues. Okay, this is our simple squamous. Remember, simple squamous, you're looking for fried eggs. So this is your fried egg appearance. And the only thing to notice in here is that little yolk right here. That is going to be, oops, sorry about that. That's going to be your nucleus. Here, here, here. The dots in the middle of those fried eggs is going to be your nucleus. So if you see this one right here, for instance, under a microscope on your practical, and I say, identify this structure, and I'm pointing to this dot here, identify this structure, you would tell me nucleus. If I point or I have this under scope and I say, identify this big tissue category, you're going to tell me epithelium or epithelial. If I ask you what the specific tissue name is, you're going to tell me simple squamous epithelium. Our next one, stratified squamous epithelium. We have a couple of structures here you have to know. Okay, right here, this dividing line where it divides the epithelial tissue from the underlying connective tissue. So this is your connective tissue down here, and up here is your epithelial tissue. So that meeting line right there is called the basement membrane. And the cells right here, right on top of that basement membrane, these are called your stem cells or your basal cells. So on a practical, if you see a slide that looks like any of these, and I ask you what this structure is down here, you're going to tell me basement membrane. If I point to this area and I say, well, what is this cell? You're going to tell me stem cell or basal cell. Again, the arrow in the microscope may not change where it's pointing, so you have to read the question. Again, if it asks structure, I'm asking for the basement membrane. If I ask you what the cell is, I'm asking for the stem cell or basal cell. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. If I ask you what is the specific tissue, the specific tissue here would be stratified squamous epithelium, and the big tissue category would be epithelium or epithelial. Going to our next tissue here, we have simple cuboidal epithelium. Remember, simple cuboidal, you're looking for circles or ovals. There's an oval here, there's circles here, circle here, there's an oval here. In this one, these little dots, here, 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 those little dots are going to be your nucleus. So if I, on a practical, ask you what this structure is, or this one, those structures are nuclei. You can also put nucleus. One is singular, one is plural, so it doesn't really matter. On the practical, I say, if I ask you what is a specific tissue name, you're going to tell me simple cuboidal epithelium. On the practical, if I ask you what the big tissue category is, you're going to tell me epithelium or epithelial. Next tissue, this is our stratified cuboidal epithelium. There's a few structures again that we have to know in this one. The good thing is we've already reviewed these structures. Let's do it on this one right here. Okay, the outside line here, whoop, not good at drawing a circle. That outside line right there is the basement membrane. So this is the epithelial tissue inside the circle, and there's some connective tissue here, and then there's another epithelial circle over here. Okay, so that circle that separates this epithelial tissue from this connective tissue out here is going to be the basement membrane, just like we had in the other tissue. And this, there's two layers of cells. You can see the two layer cells here. This cell right here and this cell right here, the cells right on that basement membrane, those cells are going to be stem cells or basal cells. You can name them either one. So on the practical, if I ask you what, and I have a pointer pointing right here, and I ask you what this structure is, the structure is the basement membrane. If I ask you what the cell is right here, the cell is a basal cell, or you can call it a stem cell. If I ask you what the specific tissue name is, you're going to tell me stratified cuboidal epithelium. If I ask you what the big tissue category is, you're going to tell me epithelium or epithelial. Again, remember, if I have a pointer over here, you have to read the question carefully. If I'm asking structure, basement membrane is the answer. If I'm asking for the cell would be stem cells or basal cells. You can use either name for those. Next tissue. This is our simple columnar epithelium. In the simple columnar epithelium, what you need to be able to label is this cell right here. That cell right there is a goblet cell. Down here, you're seeing a goblet cell right here, and a goblet cell right here, and a goblet cell right here. The goblet cells are responsible for producing mucus, okay, the snotty substance. Okay, so if on the practical, if I ask you what the specific tissue category is or specific tissue name, it is simple columnar epithelium. If I ask you for the big tissue category, it is epithelial or epithelium. If I ask you to identify that cell or that cell over there, right here, it would be a goblet cell. Going to the next one. This is stratified columnar epithelium. And in this one, we have some of the same structures that we've been looking at. Let's do this one down here. So right here, that dividing line, again, where you have the epithelial tissue up here, and you have the connective tissue down here, that dividing line between the two, that structure is called the basement membrane. And the cells that lie right on top of the basement membrane are called your stem cells or your basal cells. So on a practical, if I ask you what the specific tissue name is, you would tell me stratified columnar epithelium, and the big tissue category would be epithelium or epithelial. You can use them interchangeably. If I ask you to identify this structure is the basement membrane. If I ask you to identify this cell, that cell is the stem cell, or you can name it a basal cell. You can use those interchangeably, stem cell or basal cell. Going to the next tissue, here we have, remember this super messy, chaotic tissue? That is your pseudostratified columnar epithelium. There are some structures in here you have to know. So these eyelash structures that come off here, these are going to be your cilia. Remember, cilia look like eyelashes. Then down here, this structure is the basement membrane. Because you don't have multiple rows of cells, because remember it's fake stratified, so you do not have actual layers of cells, there are no stem cells or basal cells here to label. So the only thing you have to label down here is this structure called a basement membrane. And then in these as well, you can have these cells right here, and we can see one down here. These are your goblet cells, okay? So on a practical, if I ask you to identify this specific tissue, you would tell me pseudostratified columnar epithelium. If I ask you to identify the big tissue category, you would tell me epithelium or epithelial. If I ask you to identify these cells, the cell is a goblet cell. If I ask you to identify this structure on top here, those structures are cilia. And if I ask you to identify this structure down here, this is a basement membrane. The last tissue down here, you just have the nucleus in each one. So there's nothing really structure-wise to notice. So the only thing on here we would ask is, what are these structures? They would be nuclei or nucleus. So on a practical, if I ask you what the specific tissue is, you would tell me transitional epithelium. And if I ask you what the big tissue category is, you would tell me epithelium or epithelial.